I'm Annie, and I can't recall a single moment of my life without being with my sister. My sister Emily has been sick since she was a child. Even though our family can afford a full-time caregiver for her, I was the only one who took care of her. You might be wondering why my sister could just drop down and die if I left her side. Well, she has chronic kidney disease and severe anemia that requires constant blood donations, and the only person she can get that blood from is me. I'm surprised I've got any blood left, to be honest, and let's not get started on the number of times I've fainted. But I never complained about it. Not once. Emily is my best friend, and I would do anything for her. But sometimes it was a bit weird, because to put it bluntly, she was my only friend. I don't even know what it's like to have friends. People thought that we were weird, like that first time I took her to a support meeting. I was holding her hand nonstop, and when she stood up to introduce herself, I stood up with her. I heard someone whispering that we looked like a couple, and the others started laughing. After the meeting, we went together to the toilet, and the same people were watching us. "She's my sister, all right?" I shouted. When I looked at Emily, I noticed she was crying. My sister was very sensitive. That night, I hugged her and promised that I would never leave her side no matter what. The next week at our meeting, I left Emily to go to the bathroom for 1 minute, but on my way back, I got the fright of my life. My sister had disappeared. I started screaming her name. Everyone looked at me like I was insane, but suddenly, I saw her body lying on the floor in the next room. Was she dead? Ben, the guy in charge of the meeting, was sitting with her. He told me to relax and that she was okay. He called an ambulance and said it was on the way. It took us to the hospital, and he came along. Ben was very sweet, actually. He waited in the room with me and never left our side. The doctors told me that my sister's blood pressure had dropped and that she can be released in a couple of hours. Ben invited me for a cup of coffee while we waited. He then asked me, "So what's the deal with this weird relationship that's going on with your sister?" I didn't feel like answering his question, so I put my head down and tears started running down my cheeks. Then I felt his hand touch my chin. He lifted my head up and dried my tears. He said it was okay if I didn't want to discuss it, and he just gave me a hug. He cheered me up and we started chatting about random stuff. He was actually very cute, and before I realized it, he was flirting with me. And I kind of liked it. I felt him leaning in like he was about to kiss me, but then I heard a voice shout, "What do you think you're doing, young lady?" Ugh, it was my mom. I was surprised that she remembered she had a sick daughter and came to check up on her. I told Ben that I'll see him later to save myself the embarrassment, and I went with my mom. She seemed more upset about seeing me with a boy than the fact that her other daughter was in the hospital, but I was used to it. For some reason, I wasn't allowed to date, and my parents were very strict about it. After that, I thought about Ben the whole week, and eventually, I couldn't take it anymore. I Googled his name, found his number on the chronic kidney disease support website, and texted him. I had to do it when my sister was sleeping, or otherwise she'd ask who I was texting. I hid my phone under my pillow and waited for a reply. I could barely contain my excitement when I heard my phone buzzing. We started texting back and forth, and he asked me if we could meet for a proper date. I so badly wanted to say yes, but I couldn't go without my sister. But then he said he'd make a plan. So at the next meeting, there was a guest speaker, and Ben asked me if I could help him prepare some tea and cookies for everyone. My sister said she'd be okay, and so that's how I found myself alone in a kitchen with Ben. The moment we were alone, he didn't wait and just leaned in and kissed me. I felt like I was in a dream. We started talking, and I felt like I could open up to him. I told him about my situation, what my parents had taught me, that sisters should be there for one another all the time, and how that's the only way I know how to live. Ben just looked at me and said, "But what about you? When do you ever do anything for yourself?" But I couldn't reply. I had never truly thought about myself before, because thinking about myself felt selfish. The following day, I woke up to some bad news that shattered my world. My sister was transferred to the hospital, and the doctors told us that her kidneys were not responding to the medication anymore. One had completely failed, and if she didn't get a donor ASAP, she will die. I sat there holding her hand, sobbing. Our parents, on the other hand, smiled calmly and said, "Why, we already have a donor. Annie will happily oblige and give her sister one of her kidneys, won't you, dear?" They went on and asked how soon it could be done. I was gobsmacked. They didn't even ask me. For all I knew, they might have signed me up for a complete organ donation. Sure, doc, take my kidneys. Take my liver. What else do you need? My mom wasn't even looking at me. She just asked what I needed to sign and when they could schedule us in. But the doctors stopped them and turned to me and said, Annie, is this okay with you? Do you agree to this? My mom butted in and said, yep, of course she agrees. And then I just lost it. For the first time in my life, I stood up and shouted, no, I don't agree. I don't agree at all. You never ask me what I want. Then I stormed out of there, shaking in a fit of tears. My mom shouted after me that I was a selfish brat, but I didn't care. That was the first time I'd really left my sister. And I almost turned back to get her, but I wanted space. Actually, I wanted to see Ben. I called him and asked if we could meet. I didn't even look back to see if my parents were coming after me. I met Ben at a cafe and told him everything. On the one hand, I wanted to save my sister's life, but on the other hand, what about my life? It felt like all I did was look after her. Ben said he'd never come across any case like this before, and that my parents weren't treating me right. He said he felt suspicious about it all. He started asking about how my parents treated me when I was a kid. I told him that I thought they were like all other parents, super strict and not particularly interested in me. Then I mentioned that they never even kept any photos of me, that I'd looked, but only found photos of my sister. He said that something seemed wrong. He's been working in this field for a while and he never encountered such a weird family. He said he could look up my sister's files and find out what was going on. I asked if I could come with him because I didn't want to go home. Well, I was in for a shock. He looked up my sister on the records and then said something weird to me. Annie, your sister's file shows no sign of her having any other siblings. It's like you don't exist on her records. You're definitely related, right? I assured him we were, but then he looked in my records, and from the expressions on his face, I knew something was wrong. Annie, it looks like you're not her biological sister. You're adopted. I couldn't believe it. That had to be a mistake. All I knew was my family. I had no memory of being anywhere else or living with any other parents. I felt like my world was crumbling around me. He showed me my file, and sure enough, 17 years ago, when I was a 1-year-old, I was adopted. I wanted to puke. How could my parents lie to me all these years? Ben drove me home, and as I walked up the path, my mom came running out and asked where the heck I'd been and said my sister needed me. I just waved my file in her face and said, "Explain this!" She looked like she wanted to faint. Then the truth came out. After she gave birth to my sister and realized she was sick, they decided it was too dangerous to have any more children as both their genes meant their kids were at a higher risk of having a chronic condition. So they decided to adopt a baby so their little girl wouldn't be all alone in the world. Because they were so rich and donated loads of money to the orphanage, they were allowed to choose which baby they wanted. Their only request was that the baby has the blood type O. Ah, yes. Now the truth really came out. They adopted me to save their precious little girl's life. They'd used me all these years and didn't care if I got sick from donating a kidney, as long as their own flesh and blood daughter survived. I couldn't bear to stand there another second. I ran out in a rage, and my sister sat crying on the sofa. Ben said I could stay with him, and we could even file a report about my parents. I was so angry, but all I could think about was my sister. What if she died? Was I really the only suitable donor? Now that I'd had a taste of freedom, I didn't want to go back to being with her 24/7, but the thought of life without her was unbearable. I knew what I had to do. But the following week, I got a text from my mom saying, "Your sister is about to die. She won't accept you as a donor. You are the most selfish person I know." So I called the hospital and asked them to pretend I was an anonymous donor and try to get my sister to accept it that way. They said she'd refused mine because she'd felt so guilty for everything I'd been through. But maybe this anonymous one would work. The surgery was set up for the next week. But then a shocking event took place. The hospital called and said that my sister's body was shutting down and that she needs the donation ASAP. I hurried to the hospital. My sister was already in the operating room unconscious. They prepared me for the surgery, and after a few hours, it was done. I asked the doctors to put me in a separate room because I didn't want her to know that it was me. The surgery left me very tired. I don't know for how long I was sleeping before I opened my eyes and saw my sister in my room, sitting in the hospital chair. It was you, wasn't it? They told me it was an anonymous donor, but I know you too well, sis. I started crying immediately. I've never been so happy to see my sister in my life. The transplant was a success, and I don't regret it for a second. Ben and I have said to my sister she can stay with us whenever she wants. And the best part, I can finally go to college knowing that I saved my sister's life. And of course, now I never have to see those nasty people who raised me ever again.
I opened my eyes and squinted. The light was so bright, and for a moment I almost forgot where I was. That moment didn't last for long, though, because almost immediately I felt them. It was as if someone had come along and attached 2 coconuts to my chest. Was this what it felt like to have big breasts? I'd done it. I'd really done it. I was now the proud and slightly in pain owner of a 34 double D pair of breasts. I tried to sit upright against the back of the hospital bed, but it hurt. The surgeon had warned me that I'd feel tender for the first week or so, but I hadn't expected it to be this painful. How would I even get out of bed? A nurse passed by and saw me struggling. She propped me up against the bed and told me I needed to rest. Then she smiled reassuringly at me and told me that I looked great. Did I? I wondered. Or had this all been a mistake? I allowed myself to get lost in my thoughts for a bit, thinking back to all those moments in high school where I'd allowed my insecurities to get the better of me. It's not like I was ugly or anything, but had I been the most flat-chested girl in school? Yes, I had been, and it had bothered me a lot. I remember this one time when Savannah, the most popular girl in school, had invited us all to her sweet 16th pool party. I'd been so terrified of everyone seeing how non-existent my chest was that I'd actually stuffed my baby brother's Play-Doh inside my bikini top. It had been the closest thing I could find that might have been similar in texture to breasts. And when I looked in the mirror nervously before the party, I thought they looked pretty real. Of course, I hadn't anticipated that Drake would come up behind me and push me into the pool, my Play-Doh fake breasts falling out of my bikini top and landing with a plop on the surface of the pool. I remember the horror and shame I felt as they sunk to the bottom, and that was pretty much the turning point for me. Never lived it down. From that day on, I was constantly teased about it, even my so-called friends who still bought me Play-Doh every time it was my birthday. And of course, Savannah's voice still echoed inside my head. You know, Polly, if you're that desperate for bigger breasts, why not just get surgery? Like, if I was as flat as a pancake like you are, I'd defo get surgery. And so that was why I found myself lying on this bed in the cosmetic surgery ward, staring down at my new breast implants. I told myself it wasn't because of Savannah, and that it wasn't because of the pool incident. It was because I was an independent young woman, and I could do whatever I wanted. If I wanted bigger breasts to make me feel secure, then so what? And I paid for them myself. Okay, that last part is a bit of a lie. You see, when I went off to college, my parents gave me an allowance for the whole year. My parents aren't that well off, so I knew I had to budget carefully. Well, I'm sure you can guess what I did. I got to college, located the nearest cosmetic surgeon, and scheduled an appointment. I was supposed to bring someone along with me so that they could drive me home, but there was no one I felt comfortable enough telling. I mean, of course, people would notice soon. It's not like I could hide them from anyone. They were huge. I'm pretty petite, so they stood out a lot. That first week, I wore baggy sweaters to hide them. They were a bit bruised from the surgery, so I didn't want anyone else to see until they were fully healed. I was staying in a dorm with 2 other freshman girls, and so there was no way they wouldn't notice. They squealed when I showed them, and one of them said, "Oh, girl, the guys are going to be all over you." And they were. After they'd healed, I felt confident enough to wear low-cut tops for the first time in my life. No longer did I need to hide my flat chest. I felt feminine, and maybe now I'd finally get a boyfriend. No guys had been interested in me in high school, and I convinced myself that it was because I'd had no breasts. Well, hi boys, look at me now. And they did look. They looked a lot. I was still shy, so whenever I caught someone staring at them, I blushed. Eventually, though, I started to enjoy the attention I was getting. It made me feel like I mattered, and that I was attractive. Pretty soon after, I met a guy called George at a party, and he asked me if I'd like to go out with him sometime. I was so excited that I said yes, and then quickly ran off to find my friends to tell them. They hugged me and we did a celebratory dance. Then I realized that it was kind of rude of me to run off like that, so I headed back to the room where George was. As I entered the room, I couldn't see him. Then I spotted him. He was standing with a group of guys and they were all laughing. As I got closer, I realized what they were laughing at. He was holding 2 balloons in front of his chest, and even though the music was loud, I could still hear what he was saying. "Hi guys, I'm Polly. Do you like my fake breasts? Look at me! Look at me!" I was so humiliated. He'd literally just asked me out on a date, and yet there he was mocking me in front of everyone. He was no different from the boys I'd gone to high school with. I ran out of there in tears and didn't stop running until I was back in my room. How had he even known they were fake? And why did he think it was okay to laugh at me like that behind my back? I suddenly felt so lonely. All I wanted was to go home to my parents, tell them what I'd done and hope that they'd forgive me, but I couldn't. They'd be so angry at me and they'd probably never want to speak to me again. The worst part was that I had to see George every day as we were in the same class. He didn't even have the guts to come and apologize to me. I knew someone must have seen me crying and running out because he didn't speak to me ever again and never asked me why I wasn't interested in that date with him. It was because of him that I started thinking, had I made a mistake? Why couldn't I win? I was teased for being flat-chested, and then I was teased for having implants. Would the suffering ever end? I kind of fell into a bit of a depressive slump after that, and I should probably have mentioned earlier how much I loved ballet. I had been taking classes ever since I was a little girl, but now, since having my implants, it was not the same anymore. That first class after the surgery was really tough. I didn't feel as light on my feet anymore, and the more I practiced, the more pain I felt. Every time I did a pirouette, I would get a sharp pain in my back. My ballet teacher could see that I was in pain and said that maybe the implants were too big for me. After all, I was very petite. The one thing I thought would change my life for the better was actually destroying it. Boys thought I was shallow, I was in pain, and even my ballet teacher was treating me differently. And to top it all off, I was seriously running out of cash. I'd spent 90% of my allowance for the year on the surgery, and I barely had enough left to pay for food. There was nothing else for it. I'd have to get a job. I applied to a few bookshops, but none of them hired me. It got into my head that it was because of my implants. They were judging me and assuming I was some bimbo. Finally, I decided to apply to a diner. I saw they had an ad out front, and when I went in to ask about it, they hired me on the spot. In fact, they pretty much hired my breasts on the spot, because that was the only place the manager was looking. I swear he didn't make eye contact with me once. I felt sick at the thought of working for such a man, but also I needed the money desperately. My life became a monotonous routine of study, work, sleep, and I was in so much pain from the implants that I ended up having to see a chiropractor to try and help ease the back pain I was getting. It was a never-ending cycle, and every spare dollar I had went towards finding a more competent bra to support my implants or on pain medication. Christmas was coming, and that meant I would have to see my parents. There was no way I could hide this from them, and they were already pretty angry at me as my grades weren't as good as they used to be. I could hardly tell them that I spent every waking hour working instead of studying because I'd spent all their money on trying to boost my confidence. It was seriously a disaster! Just before Christmas, I was working on one of my last shifts at the diner for the year. I felt relieved to get out of there. I was sick of my manager staring at my chest, and that shift was no different. I have never been so upset in all my life. All those fears I'd had about people perceiving me as shallow and attention-seeking were coming to the surface, especially that I was never used to it before the surgery. As I walked home in the snow, tears running down my cheeks, I made the decision to tell my parents and ask them to help me to get these stupid implants removed. Getting breast implants was the worst thing I'd ever done in my life. I couldn't live like this anymore. Well, my parents were, of course, furious, but more than that, they were upset. Upset that I'd been such an insecure teenager, and upset that I'd betrayed their trust like this. That Christmas vacation, they could see how much pain and humiliation my implants brought me, and without me even asking them, they offered to pay for me to get them removed. I didn't even have to think about it. I knew it was the right decision, and I was so unbelievably grateful that my parents supported me, even after how I'd betrayed them. I can't explain the lightness I felt when they were removed, not just physically, but also mentally. I felt like a weight had been taken off of me. I could breathe again and practice ballet. And I even got a job in the library so that I could pay my parents back for the removal surgery. This time, no one looked at my chest. In fact, no one even cared. I realized that my insecurity about the size of my breasts was self-inflicted, and that true friends couldn't care less about how big or small they were. Getting implants was seriously the biggest mistake I've ever made. But hey, if I hadn't done it, I might not be as happy and comfortable in my own skin as I am today. I guess there's always a lesson to be learned, even if it's a pretty painful one. What do you think of my story? Please share your comments and don't forget to like this video and subscribe to